Mornings in our house always start the same way. I open my eyes at 6:30 sharp, a minute before my alarm clock goes off. It's an old habit developed over the years. I carefully turn the bell off so as not to wake Rupert and Justina. Though admittedly, I don't really care whether I disturb their sleep or not. I just don't want to start the day with unhappy looks and annoyed sighs. My slippers are exactly where I left them the night before, neatly by the bed, toes toward the door. This is another habit that brings a condescending chuckle to Justina's face. Oberon's got his slippers lined up again, she whispers to Rupert when she thinks I can't hear. I can hear. At 73, my eyesight may be failing, but my hearing is still excellent. Stepping quietly down the hallway, I make my way to the kitchen. It's the nicest time of day. The house is still quiet, and for a brief half hour, I can feel like a master within my own walls. I put the kettle on and take the brew out of the tin with Big Ben on it, a souvenir from my trip to London with Elizabeth. 25 years have passed, and I still miss her every day. As the water boils, I look out the window at my garden. I used to spend my weekends there, mowing the lawn, tending the roses that Elizabeth loves so much. Now the garden is in Justina's hands. The rose bushes have long since been uprooted, replaced by some fancy plants whose names I can't even remember. "It's landscaping, Daddy," she said then. "Your roses look like they were in a nursing home." Nursing home. Those words have been heard more often lately. So far only in the form of jokes and casual remarks. But I'm not so naive that I don't realize which way the wind is blowing. "Up at the crack of dawn again?" Justina's voice breaks into my thoughts. "We asked you not to rattle the dishes in the morning." "I didn't. I just put the cup on the saucer." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake anyone," I replied, trying not to sound annoyed. Justina pulls her fancy yogurt out of the fridge and sits down across from me. She's 38, but she looks younger, thanks to regular trips to the gym and some expensive treatments that I suspect are paid for out of my pension. "Rupert and I are thinking of redecorating your room," she says without looking at me. "That wallpaper is a nightmare. It must be from the last century." Elizabeth picked out the wallpaper. We did it together, a year before she got sick. But Justina doesn't know that. Or she does, but she doesn't care. "If you say so," I say, and add some brew to my cup. This is how my days pass in the house I built with my own hands. I move quietly, speak little, try to be inconspicuous. Sometimes I think that if I freeze in place, they will just walk right through me as if I were a ghost. Maybe I am. A ghost of what I once was. A respected man in my own home. After breakfast, I go back to my room. It's the only place I still feel like myself. I carefully lock the door and pull out an old wooden box from under my bed. Rupert and Justina call my coin collection a pile of old junk. They don't understand. They never have. The first coin was given to me by my father when I was 10 years old. An old silver shilling from King George's time. "Take care of it, son," he said at the time. "This coin will outlive us all." The collection has been a part of my life ever since. Every coin is a story, a memory, and there is one special coin among them. But I hear footsteps in the hallway and quickly put the box away. There's a knock at my door, and without waiting for an answer, Rupert is already opening it with his key. "Dad, are you locking yourself in again?" I can hear the irritation in his voice. "Justina's worried that something will happen to you, and we won't be able to get in." I nod, even though we both know that's not what Justina's worried about. She's worried that I'm hiding some valuables from them. Well, in a way I am. "I'm sorry, son." "Habit," I reply and smile. Rupert looks at me, and for a moment I think I see an echo of the warmth in his eyes. But the moment passes, and in front of me again is a man I hardly recognize. My son, who grew up on my shoulders, who was educated through my labor, now looks at me as a burden. "By the way, Dad," he says carelessly, "we're a little tight on money this month. Justina wants to update her closet before the corporate party, and it's time to change the car." I know exactly where he's going with this. It's not the first time we've had this conversation. "How much do you need?" I ask him straight out. Rupert names an amount that is almost a third of my monthly pension. I nod silently and go to the table where I keep my cash. I count out the amount I need and hand it to him. He takes the money without looking me in the eye, mumbles, "Thank you," and walks out. Once upon a time, when Rupert was 7, he looked at me with admiration. I was his hero. I taught him to ride his bike in the park nearby, read him books before bed, helped him with his homework. After Elizabeth died, I became both father and mother to him. Elizabeth left so suddenly. A brain tumor that was discovered too late. 3 months of agony and she was gone. Rupert was only 14. "We'll get through this, son," I told him at the funeral, holding him tightly by the shoulders. "Mom would want us to be strong." And we did. I worked 2 jobs to pay for his college, gave up everything so he could have the best education possible. I put my hobbies, coin collecting, fishing, traveling, on hold. Retirement, for when Rupert was back on his feet. That later never came. When Rupert graduated from university, he married Justine straight away. The young people needed somewhere to live, so I invited them to stay with me. Temporarily. It's been 10 years now. Temporarily. I get up and walk over to the window. My room overlooks the backyard. There, under an old oak tree, is where the swing I made for Rupert used to stand. Now it's a barbecue area where Justina throws parties for her co-workers. I'm not invited to those parties. "You'll be bored, Dad," Rupert says. "It's all young people, talking about work." Sometimes I look out the window at them, laughing, drinking wine, carefree, and I think about how strange life is. I've invested all of myself in my son, given him everything I have, and the result is that I'm a stranger in my own home. But I'm not angry. I'm not resentful. I realize that's life. Kids grow up and leave. It's natural. But in my case, it wasn't my son who left. It was me. Not physically, but emotionally, I'm no longer part of this family. In the evening, when Rupert and Justina leave for another party, I take out my jewelry box again. I go through the coins, remembering the history of each one. Here's a worn penny found in the park when Rupert and I flew a kite. Here's a silver dollar given to me by a coworker as a retirement gift. And here it is, my pride, my treasure. A colonial-era gold doubloon, an incredibly rare piece. My father gave it to me before he died. "It's been in our family for 200 years, he said then. "Keep it for your son." I did. All these years later, I waited for the moment when Rupert would be old enough to appreciate not the monetary, but the historical value of the coin. But that moment never came. I carefully wipe the doubloon with a soft cloth and return it to its place. Sometimes I think about how much it might be worth. A few years ago, I showed it to an appraiser I knew, and he whistled in amazement. "That's a fortune, Oberon," he said then. "If you decide to sell, I'll find a buyer for you." I didn't. It was a family heirloom, the last link between me and my father. But lately, I've been coming back to that thought more and more often. Maybe it was time. The sound of the front door snapped me out of my thoughts. Rupert and Justina are back earlier than usual. I hear their voices muffled but excited. They're arguing about something. I move closer to the door and listen. "I say it's perfect," Justina proves. "Westbrook Gardens is the best nursing home around. He'll have someone there to take care of him. And we won't have to—" "He's my father, Justina," Rupert interrupts her, but without much conviction in his voice. We can't go on living like this. You're 39, I'm 38, and we're still living like students because half the house is his cluttered den. Think of the future, of the children we could have." I move away from the door and sit on the bed. So that's it. They want to get rid of me. Send me to a nursing home. Make room for the kids they still don't have. Although, to be honest, I knew it was coming. Too many hints, too many innuendos in the last few months. Suddenly, I feel a strange sense of relief, as if the long wait for the inevitable has finally come to an end. I carefully close the coin box and slide it under the bed. Then I walk over to the table, take a piece of paper, and start writing. A plan forms in my head, plain and simple. They want to get rid of me. Well, I won't cling to a house I've long felt like a stranger in, but I will leave on my own terms, and I will take with me what is rightfully mine, my collection, my freedom, my life. Maybe for the first time in years, I feel truly alive. It's as if the veil has lifted from my eyes and I can finally see clearly. I am no longer a shadow in my own home. I am Oberon Pruitt, and I have a plan. I spent the next few days watching Rupert and Justina with renewed attentiveness. After the conversation I had overheard, I saw their behavior in a different light. Every look, every phrase now seemed part of a carefully thought-out plan to get rid of me. Tuesday morning, Justina entered the kitchen as I was preparing my oatmeal. She was unusually friendly. "How did you sleep, Oberon?" she asked, taking her yogurt out of the refrigerator. "I noticed that your mattress is pretty old. Maybe you should get an orthopedic one." I suppressed a chuckle. The sudden concern for my comfort looked suspicious after the nursing home conversation I'd overheard. "Thank you, Justina, but I'm used to my mattress," I replied calmly. "At my age, new doesn't always mean better." She nodded with a strained smile. Of course, of course. Just a thought. By the way, Rupert and I wanted to talk to you tonight. Nothing serious, just some thoughts about the future. Here it is. They've decided not to delay." "I'll look forward to it," I replied, stirring my oatmeal. In the afternoon, when the house was empty, I pulled out my coin collection. I spread them out on the bed, examining each one carefully. Over the years, about 150 had accumulated, ranging from plain old pennies to really rare specimens. Most were of little value, but there were some real treasures. The most valuable, of course, was the gold doubloon. I kept it in a separate velvet box, opening it rarely, just to make sure it was in order. The coin was minted in 1738 during Spanish colonial rule. On one side was the profile of King Philip V, on the other the coat of arms of the Spanish crown. The gold gleamed dimly in the light of the table lamp. "Here we are again, old friend," I whispered, holding the coin carefully with tweezers. I remember my father telling me the story of this doubloon. It came into our family from a great-great-grandfather who was a sailor and, according to family legend, found it in a treasure chest on a sunken ship. Whether it's true or fiction, I'll never know. But the coin was authentic, as confirmed by an expert I showed it to a few years ago. "It's really rare," said Alan Forsyth, an old acquaintance of mine from the Numismatic Society. "Casornom. There are only a few of them in private collections. Museums would pay a fortune for such a treasure." I asked him how much it might be worth, and he gave me a figure that took my breath away. $5 million, maybe more at the right auction. "If you ever think of selling, let me know," Alan added. "I'll put you in touch with some serious collectors. Although, it's a family heirloom, right?" "Yeah, it's a family heirloom, which I was supposed to pass on to my son. But looking at Rupert now, I doubted he'd appreciate its true value. Not monetary, but historical, emotional. He would probably just sell it at the first opportunity to buy a new car or pay for the repairs Justina kept talking about." I carefully returned the doubloon to the box and continued going through the rest of my collection. Silver dollars, foreign coins, commemorative issues. Each had its own story. Each was a part of my life. The sound of the front door opening made me flinch. I quickly put the coins back in the jewelry box and hid it under the bed. Someone had come home earlier than usual. "Dad, are you home?" Rupert's voice. "Yes, I am," I answered, adjusting the covers on the bed. He didn't come in, but shouted from the hallway, "Justina and I will be back late, so don't expect us for dinner." I heard Justina's muffled laughter and whispers, then the front door slammed. They'd left without looking at me. Well, that was good. I had time to think. The evening's conversation had obviously been postponed, but that didn't change the point. They were planning to send me to a nursing home. Westbrook Gardens was the name of the place Justina had mentioned, I think. I'd heard of it, an expensive place with a good reputation, but still a facility for old people who had no one or no reason to stay at home. I went to the window. The sun was slipping toward sunset, coloring the sky orange. My garden, once my pride, was now barely recognizable. Justina had completely remodeled it to her taste. Minimalist, modern, impersonal, like the rest of the house. I remembered what it used to be like when Elizabeth was alive. Cozy, warm, full of life. Now it was coldly functional, like a model home from a catalog beautiful for pictures, but not for life. Maybe Justina was right. Maybe I really would be better off in a specialized institution, among my peers. The thought flashed in and out of my mind. No, I'm still strong enough to live on my own, and proud enough not to let myself be kicked out the door like a piece of junk. This evening I had dinner alone, in silence. I made myself a simple ham and cheese sandwich and made tea. I used to make full dinners, even when I was alone. a habit left over from my time with Elizabeth. But in the last few months, I'd been limiting myself more and more to something simple. Why bother trying if no one would appreciate it? After dinner, I turned on the TV but didn't watch it, immersed in my thoughts. I had to decide what to do next. Should I wait for Rupert and Justina to kick me out completely, or should I act on my own? I pulled out my phone and opened my contact list. Alan Forsyth, my friend from the Numismatic Society. We hadn't spoken in a year or two, but he'd always said he'd be willing to help if I decided to sell the doubloon. Maybe it's time. I haven't called. Not yet. We need to hear exactly what Rupert and Justina are planning first. Give them a chance to do the right thing, even though I no longer believed it was possible. Around midnight, I heard them come back. The voices were louder than usual. It sounded like they'd been drinking. I turned off the lights in the room but stayed up, sitting in the chair by the window. "He'll be better there," Justina's voice came to me. "Care, companionship, entertainment. Everything he needs at his age." "I know," Rupert answered. "It's just awkward. He is my father after all." "Honey, you don't have to feel guilty. Westbrook Gardens isn't like a nursing home. It's like a five-star hotel. Besides, think of us. Think of our future. I'm 38, and if we're going to have kids—" "Yes, you're right," Rupert sighed. "His room would be perfect for a nursery. And we can finally do that renovation we've been talking about." "And sell that awful old furniture," said Justina enthusiastically. "Imagine how Scandinavian minimalism will look here. And in the garden, I've wanted a bigger barbecue area for a long time." They continued to make plans for the future, where there was no room for me. They talked about color schemes, furniture, landscaping, about how great it would be to finally have the house all to myself. I listened and felt not even resentment building up inside, but some kind of deafening longing. When did my boy turn into this stranger? Where did I go wrong bringing him up? Or is it not in me, but in the natural course of things? Children grow up and distance themselves from their parents. "And his pension will help us pay for the nursing home," Justina continued. "He's giving us most of it anyway. And maybe he'll agree to sell some of his stuff. These old coins, for instance. I'm sure there's something valuable among them." "I don't know," Rupert said. "He treasures his collection." "Of course he does. But he'll need something to live on, won't he? We won't be able to pay for him to stay at Westbrook. It's only fair that he contribute his share. So here's the deal. They don't just want to send me to a nursing home. They want me to pay for my own banishment. And apparently they plan to get their hands on my collection." I quietly rose from the chair and walked over to the bed. Kneeling down, I pulled out the coin box and opened it. In the dim moonlight streaming through the window, the gold doubloon glimmered dimly. I took it carefully with my fingers. "It seems your time has come, old friend," I whispered. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I lay in the dark, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall, an old mechanical clock from my father. Tick-tock, 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 like the countdown of time running out. By morning, the decision is ripe. I will no longer wait to be sent out the door. I will leave on my own terms, and I will take with me what is rightfully mine. When the first rays of sunlight came through the curtains, I knew what I was going to do. Alan Forsyth. I should call him and see if his offer to help sell the doubloon was still on the table. If so, it could change everything. I carefully put the coins back in the box, hid it under the bed, and began to pack. Today is a big day for me. I need to start preparing to live on my own. The following Sunday, Rupert and Justina invited me to a family dinner. It was unusual. Usually we only eat together on major holidays. I knew right away it was time. Justina had done her best. Baked chicken, mashed potatoes, avocado salad, my favorite dishes. There was even a bottle of wine on the table, which I had loved in the past before the doctors forbade alcohol due to blood pressure problems. Obviously, they had carefully prepared for the conversation. "It looks great," I said, sitting down at the table. "I did my best," Justina smiled, filling glasses. "It was a special occasion after all." Rupert looked tense. He kept adjusting his shirt collar and avoiding my gaze. I almost sympathized with him. It must be hard to kick his own father out of the house. We ate in silence for the first few minutes. Then Justina cleared her throat. "Oberon, Rupert and I have something important to discuss with you," she began in a formal tone, as if she were conducting a business meeting. I nodded, continuing to eat my mashed potatoes. It was too salty, but I didn't comment on that. We thought about it for a long time and decided that, she stammered and glanced at Rupert. Dad, he said, finally meeting my eyes. We're worried about you. You're spending more and more time alone, rarely leaving the house. It's not healthy at your age. At my age? I asked calmly. And what's unhealthy about a 73-year-old man who prefers peace? It's not just that, Justina interjected. We've noticed that you're finding it harder to cope with everyday tasks. Remember last week when you forgot to turn off the stove? That wasn't true. I never forgot to turn off the stove. But I didn't argue. And the stairs, Rupert continued. It's getting harder and harder for you to climb them. We notice you stopping to catch your breath. It was true. My knees aren't what they used to be. But I could just move the bedroom to the first floor, the former study. Though, of course, Justina had already planned to turn it into a yoga studio. Where are you going with this? I asked, even though I knew the answer. They looked at each other, and Justina took the lead. We found a great place for you, she said enthusiastically. Westbrook Gardens. It's not just a nursing home, it's a complex for active retirees. There's a pool, a library, a movie room, creative workshops, and 24-hour medical care, which is very important at your age. Rupert pulled a glossy brochure out of his pocket and handed it to me. On the cover, happy gray-haired men were playing golf against a modern building surrounded by manicured lawns. We've already gone there. Talk to the administration, Justina continued. They're ready for you anytime. They've just vacated a lovely studio apartment overlooking the garden. I leafed through the brochure, looking at the pictures of smiling old people doing various activities. It all looked too perfect, like a drug commercial. And how much does this splendor cost? I asked, knowing that Westbrook Gardens was one of the most expensive facilities of its kind in St. Paul. It's not cheap, Rupert admitted, but we'll help pay for it, and your pension will cover most of the expenses. And if we sell some of your things, Justina added, glancing at Rupert, we'll have enough for several years. You won't be able to take all those collections. There it is. I'd expected that, but I still felt a pang of irritation. They've already mentally sold off my stuff. My coin collection, you mean? I clarified. Well, yes, Justina shrugged. And all those old books and the antique clocks? Honestly, your room is a real antique museum. Half of it could probably be sold, and the rest, well, you're not likely to need it. Well, you're not likely to need it in your new life. I put the brochure aside and looked at them. My son and his wife, my family, the only close people left in my life, and they couldn't wait to get rid of me and my stuff. I expected to feel anger or resentment, but instead I felt a strange calmness. It was as if the last thread that had tied me to my illusions about our family had finally been severed. When do you plan to move me? I asked in a steady voice. They looked at each other again, clearly surprised by my calmness. Were you expecting tears, protests, scandal? Well, we were thinking maybe at the end of the month, Rupert suggested cautiously. It would give you time to get organized, and it would give us time to settle the formalities with the Westbrook administration. All right, I nodded. The end of the month will be fine. Really? Justina couldn't hide her surprise. I mean, you're okay with it? No objections? I smiled. Why should I object? You've obviously thought this through carefully. And maybe you're right. I really would be better off among my peers, with medical help at my fingertips. You both work all day. You can't look after me. The relief on their faces was almost comical. Rupert even relaxed his shoulders, which had been tense all this time. Dad, I'm so glad you understand, he said with a smile. We only want the best for you. Of course we do, son, I replied. I never doubted it. The rest of the dinner was spent in an unexpectedly upbeat mood. Rupert and Justina, encouraged by my agreement, talked enthusiastically about all the advantages of Westbrook Gardens, about how interesting it was, how many activities there were, how nice the neighbors were. I listened, nodded, and smiled, thinking about my own, about the gold doubloon hidden in the box under my bed, about the phone conversation I'd had with Alan Forsyth yesterday, about the small apartment I'd already looked at on the other side of town, expensive but clean and bright. There's just one problem, I said as Justina served the coffee. I'd have to take my coin collection with me. All of it? Justina asked with obvious disappointment. But there isn't much storage space in Westbrook. The collection is my life, I answered firmly. I've collected it for over 60 years. I can't part with it. Of course, Papa, Rupert interjected, casting a warning glance at his wife. You can have whatever you want. After all, they're your things. Justina pressed her lips together, but remained silent. I could see her plans to sell off my junk were falling apart. Thank you for understanding, I said, finishing my coffee. I think I'm going to go to my room. I need to start sorting things out now that I've made my decision. The next 2 weeks passed in preparation for the move. I methodically sorted through my things, deciding what to take with me and what to leave behind. Books, clothes, photo albums. It all had to be packed. But my main concern was my coin collection. I bought a special padded case with individual cells for each coin. I was especially careful in preparing the gold doubloon for transportation. For it, I bought a separate protective case with a double fastening system. From time to time, Justina looked into my room, watching the packing process. One day, she caught me working with the coins. I don't know why you need all this old scrap metal, she said as she watched me carefully place the silver dollars in the drawers of the case. You could sell it all and live off of it. It's not scrap metal, I replied calmly. It's history. Each coin is a piece of the past that you can hold in your hands. But they're not worth anything, she shrugged. Rupert said you never bought any really valuable pieces. I barely held back a smile. If only she'd known about the doubloon. But Rupert really didn't know about it. I'd never shown him the most valuable part of my collection, intuitively feeling that he wouldn't appreciate its true value. Value isn't always measured in money, I said philosophically. What matters to me are the memories associated with each coin. Justina rolled her eyes and left the room, muttering something about old man's quirks. Finally, the day of the move came. Rupert took the day off work to drive me to Westbrook Gardens. Justina was home too, helping with the final preparations. I was up early before dawn. I checked the contents of my suitcases and bags one last time. I looked especially carefully at the coin case. Everything was there, including the doubloon in its special case. When Rupert and Justina came down for breakfast, I was already in the kitchen with a cup of tea, fully dressed and ready to go. You're early, Dad, Rupert said. We were thinking of leaving this afternoon. I prefer not to delay the inevitable, I replied with a smile. Besides, it would give me more time to get settled in before tonight. Justina made coffee and took a yogurt out of the refrigerator. She looked lively, even excited. Of course, because soon she would have the house all to herself. Did you pack everything? She asked. Aren't you forgetting anything? Everything I need is packed, I nodded. The rest, well, I'll have to leave it behind. In a new life, you have to be able to let go of the past. Rupert put his hand on my shoulder. Dad, you realize you can always come back if you want to, don't you? This is still your home, too. I looked up at him. In that moment, he seemed sincere. Maybe somewhere deep down inside, he really believed what he was saying. Or maybe he was just salving his conscience. Thank you, son, I replied. But I think Westbrook will be my new home. That's the way it's going. After breakfast, we started moving things out. 2 large suitcases, several boxes of books and photo albums, a special coin case. Rupert was surprised by the amount of luggage. Are you sure you can fit it all into your apartment in Westbrook? He asked, loading another box into the trunk. It'll fit, I assured him. I had it all figured out ahead of time. Of course, what I didn't tell him was that I hadn't calculated the size of the nursing home apartment, but the space of a completely different dwelling. Finally, everything was ready. We stood at the front door, me, Rupert, and Justina. A moment of farewell. Well, I said, looking back at the house I'd lived in most of my life. It was time to move on. Justina hugged me awkwardly. We'll visit you every weekend, she said without much enthusiasm. Rupert hugged me too, and in his embrace I felt something like real warmth. I'll call you tonight to see how you're settling in, he said. I smiled and nodded. Then I turned and walked out the door without looking back. I walked down the walkway to Rupert's car, sat in the front seat, and buckled my seatbelt. Rupert got behind the wheel and we started up. I stared ahead at the road, not casting a single glance at the house behind me. Everything that was important, I took with me. Where to first? Rupert asked. Straight to Westbrook, or do you want to stop somewhere on the way? Let's stop at Martha's Cafe on Fifth Avenue, I suggested. We'll have coffee before the long drive. Rupert agreed, not realizing that a cab was waiting for me at that cafe. I had no intention of going to Westbrook Gardens. I had an entirely different destination, and a whole different life ahead of me. The morning light streamed through the tulle curtains, filling my new apartment with a soft glow. I sat in a chair by the window, watching the city awaken. From here on the fifth floor, I had a view of a small park and part of the Mississippi River in the distance. Not as impressive a landscape as the one from the windows of my old house, but it had its charm. The apartment I rented was modest, a living room combined with a kitchen, a bedroom, and a small bathroom. Only about 50 square meters, but for me alone is more than enough. The main thing is that it's quiet, clean, and no one is looking at me with poorly concealed irritation. After last night's escape, which was an escape anyway, I felt strangely empty. Not regret, no. More like relief mixed with bitterness. This wasn't how I'd envisioned the end of my relationship with my only son. The cab picked me up at Martha's Cafe just as Rupert went to the restroom. I quickly loaded my things and drove away, leaving a note telling him that I had decided to live on my own and not to worry about me. Cowardly, perhaps, but I didn't want any more explanations and entreaties. The phone on the table vibrated again. I looked at the screen. Rupert, for the 37th time that morning. The total number of missed calls had already passed 180, 183 to be exact, plus a few dozen messages I hadn't bothered to read. I turned off the sound and set the phone aside. Let him worry. After all, he was going to send me to a nursing home like a tired dog to a kennel. Why couldn't I do it my way for once? The clock read 10:30. Alan Forsyth and a representative from the National Museum of Numismatics were due in half an hour. I glanced at the coin case on the coffee table. Inside, in a special protective case, rested a gold doubloon, the most valuable thing I had. I remembered my father handing me that coin decades ago. We were sitting on the veranda of our old house on the evening of my 30th birthday. My mother had already gone to bed and my father and I stayed up, sipping whiskey and talking about life. I have something for you, son, he said, pulling a small box out of his pocket. This has been passed down in our family from father to son for 4 generations. Now it's your turn. In the box was a gold doubloon, gleaming dimly in the light of the lamp. I was amazed, and until that moment, I had never even suspected such a treasure existed in our poor family. Why didn't you show it to me before? I asked. My father grinned. Some things have to be earned. One waits for the right moment. I received this coin from my father on my 30th birthday. He got it from his, and so on. Is it valuable? Priceless, my father replied. And not just because it's gold or rare. It's a symbol of our family history, of our connection through the generations. Keep it safe and one day pass it on to your son, when you feel he's ready. I never felt Rupert was ready. Whenever I thought about showing him the doubloon, something stopped me. Intuition, perhaps. Or maybe it was just that I knew my son too well. Practical, calculating, seeing value only in what could be converted into money here and now. The doorbell jerked me out of my memories. I got up, pulled on my sweater, and went to open it. Alan Forsyth, an old friend of mine from the Numismatic Society, stood on the doorstep, flanked by an elegant woman in her 40s in a smart suit. Oberon, you old rascal, Alan exclaimed, hugging me. You made up your mind after all. I did, I nodded, letting the guests into the apartment. Meet Victoria Hammond, the chief expert of the National Museum of Numismatics. Alan introduced his companion. We shook hands and I invited them into the living room. I apologize for the modest furnishings, I said, pointing to an almost empty room with minimal furniture. I just moved in yesterday. That's okay, Victoria smiled. We're not here for the furnishings. We sat around the coffee table where the case with my collection stood. Alan looked as excited as a kid in a candy store. Are you going to show us your treasure? He asked, rubbing his hands together. I nodded and opened the case. Inside, in neat boxes, were the coins of my collection. I pulled out the special doubloon case and handed it to Victoria. She put on white gloves, which was a sign of her seriousness, and carefully removed the coin. Then she took a magnifying glass out of her bag and began to scrutinize the doubloon. turning it under the light of a table lamp. Alan and I watched in silence. My friend's face reflected undisguised admiration, and I tried to understand how I felt about parting with the family heirloom. Strangely, there was no regret or guilt, just a quiet sadness that the tradition would end on me. After a few minutes, Victoria looked up from the coin. "Mr. Pruitt," she said with a note of awe in her voice, "this is truly exceptional. A Spanish colonial gold doubloon from the year 1738, minted in Mexico City. It's in near-perfect condition. I'd rate it extremely fine on the international scale." "So it's authentic?" I asked, though I never doubted it. "Absolutely," Victoria nodded. "Such coins are extremely rare. There are only a few in museum collections, and even fewer in private hands." "How did it come to you?" I told about the family history of the doubloon, how it was passed from generation to generation. Victoria listened with obvious interest. "That makes it even more valuable," she said. "Provenance, or as we say, provenance, is extremely important for museum acquisitions." "How much is the museum willing to offer for it?" Alan asked, getting to the point. Victoria carefully returned the doubloon to its case and took out a folder with documents from her bag. "Given its rarity, preservation, and provenance, the museum is prepared to offer $5 million, she said, looking me straight in the eye. "That's the maximum of our acquisition budget this year, but the coin is certainly worth it. $5 million, a sum that will completely change my life. A comfortable old age, travel, charity work." But it wasn't about the money, or rather, it wasn't just about the money. "I want the history of my family to be mentioned in the museum exhibition," I said, "and I want the coin to be available for public viewing, not dust in the vault." Victoria smiled. "It is standard practice for such significant exhibits. We will create a special showcase with full information about the coin's origin. Your family history will become a part of our exposition." We discussed the details of the deal. The procedure was not quick. It was necessary to draw up a lot of documents, to carry out additional expertise in laboratory conditions. But we signed the preliminary agreement right there at my coffee table. When Victoria and Alan left, taking the doubloon with them for further examination, I received an official receipt. I was alone in my quiet apartment. The feeling was strange. It was as if an important chapter of my life had closed, but a new one had opened at the same time. The phone vibrated again. I glanced at the screen. It wasn't Rupert calling, but an unfamiliar number. Maybe he was trying to call from another phone. I didn't answer it. Instead, I walked to the window and stared out at the city spread out in front of me. St. Paul, the city I'd lived in all my life, but had never really explored. There were always better things to do. Work, family, obligations. Now I had the time, and soon there would be funds. I could start from scratch. At 73, who would have thought it? I remembered Rupert's face the last time we'd sat together at the dinner table. How he'd talked about worrying about my health, about my future. Did he really believe what he was saying? Or was it just a convenient mask to hide his true motives? My gaze fell on the case containing the rest of my coin collection. Without the doubloon, it had lost its main gem, but it was still valuable, not so much in monetary terms, but as a memory of a life lived. The places I'd been, the people I'd met, the moments I wanted to preserve. Rupert was never interested in my collection. When I tried to tell him about a particularly interesting coin, he would listen politely for a minute or two and then find an excuse to leave. He didn't care about history, didn't care about family traditions, money, status, material possessions. That was his world. I didn't blame him. It was partly my fault too. Perhaps I had failed to instill in him a love of history, of tradition. Too busy making money to provide for us after Elizabeth's death, I had missed something important in raising my son. The phone came to life again, now with the sound of an incoming message. I picked it up and read, "Daddy, where are you? Justina and I are going crazy with worry. Please call me, Rupert." That message was followed by dozens of others ranging from concerned to almost panicked to downright angry. In the latter, Rupert was already accusing me of selfishness and irresponsibility. Well, maybe he was right. Maybe it was selfish to leave like that, without warning, making them worry. But wasn't it selfish of them to plan to get rid of me like I was an unwanted thing? I put the phone away without answering. The time to talk would come, but not today. Today I wanted to savor my new independence, my decision made on my own, without regard for the expectations of others. I made tea, the real Ceylon tea I'd always loved, but had given up at home because Justina thought it smelled senile. I sat down in a chair, holding the hot cup in my palms, and felt a wonderful peace. At that moment, I realized that for the first time in many years, I was truly content. Not happy, no. Too much bitterness had accumulated over the years for simple happiness, but satisfied that I had finally taken my life into my own hands. Maybe that's where the gold doubloon had been leading me all these years. Maybe its true value wasn't in its gold or rarity, but in the lesson it ultimately taught me. The lesson that it's never too late to start over, never too late to say enough to something that makes you miserable. When it got dark, I turned on the TV to listen to the evening news. Nothing much was going on. The usual city events, politics, sports. The world kept spinning, completely unconcerned about the little drama of one family in St. Paul. Before I went to bed, I checked my phone one more time. 183 missed calls. How symbolic, like a day for every year I've lived in this world. I turned off the phone and went to bed. Tomorrow would be a new day, a day I would face on my own terms, by my own rules. And that was a damn good feeling. Tuesday morning began with a quiet knock on the door. I put aside the newspaper I'd been reading at breakfast and went to open it. A delivery man stood on the doorstep with a small box in his hands. "Mr. Pruitt?" he asked, checking the delivery note. I nodded, and he handed me the package along with a clipboard for my signature. After he left, I went back to the kitchen and carefully opened the box. Inside was an issue of the St. Paul Pioneer Press and a note from Victoria Hammond. "Thought you might enjoy seeing this. Regards, VH." I unfolded the paper. On page 3, a large headline caught my eye. National Museum of Numismatics acquires rarest gold coin for record $5 million. Under the headline was a photograph of my doubloon, enlarged enough to see the minute details of the minting. I began to read. On Monday, the National Museum of Numismatics announced the acquisition of a unique Spanish colonial gold doubloon from the year 1738 for a record $5 million. The coin was acquired from an elderly Minnesota collector who wished to remain anonymous. "This is one of our museum's most significant acquisitions in decades," said Victoria Hammond, the museum's chief examiner. "The condition of the coin is almost perfect, which is incredible for a specimen of this age. What's more, this coin has a documented history, having been passed down in the same family for 5 generations. According to experts, such coins are extremely rare. Most colonial-era doubloons have been melted down or lost. The surviving specimens are usually in much worse condition. The coin will be on display in a special exhibition at the museum starting next month. In addition to the doubloon itself, visitors will be able to learn its history and the story of the family that has kept this treasure for almost 300 years." I smiled, imagining Rupert's reaction if he saw the article. Knowing his habits, he hardly reads newspapers. He prefers to get his news from the internet, and that's mostly business and technology. But St. Paul is a small town, and news travels fast, especially breaking news like this. I wonder how long before he connects the dots. A father who was a coin collector suddenly disappeared. An elderly collector in Minnesota sold a rare coin for $5 million. It doesn't take a genius to guess. I folded the newspaper and tucked it away in my desk drawer. It was a trophy of sorts, a memento of how, at 73, I had finally taken control of my life. I hadn't turned my phone on in days. I didn't want to hear the accusations or the fake apologies or the pleas to come back. Let Rupert and Justina live in obscurity for a while. It would be fair, considering how they planned to treat me. After breakfast, I went to the bank. I needed to open a new account to transfer the proceeds from the coin sale. The paperwork took a few days, but it was finally done. The young bank clerk looked at me with poorly concealed surprise as she processed the documents. "It's not every day an elderly person comes to open an account to hold $5 million. You'll need to sign a few more forms," she said, handing me a stack of papers. "And we recommend you meet with our financial advisor to discuss investment options." I nodded. The money hadn't arrived yet. That would happen after all the checks and formalities were completed, but it was worth preparing in advance. One more thing, Mr. Pruitt, the girl added, lowering her voice. We strongly advise you not to divulge information about such large sums of money, for your own safety. I grinned. It was too late to give such advice when the sale was already in the city paper. Although my name wasn't in it, anyone who knows me and knows about my hobby could have guessed it. Finished with my business at the bank, I decided to take a walk around town. The day was clear and warm. One of those rare fall days when nature seems to give you one last break before the cold weather sets in. I walked along the familiar streets, looking at the shop windows, watching the passers-by. Strangely, I'd hardly noticed it before. I'd been too busy with work, family, obligations, and yet the city is beautiful in its everyday hustle and bustle. At the corner of 5th and Wobusha, I saw a street cafe serving coffee and fresh pastries. I decided to sit there, enjoying the sunshine and the feeling of freedom. After ordering a cappuccino and a croissant, I settled down at a table on the open veranda. There was a stack of fresh newspapers next to me, and I picked up the top one. It was the latest issue of the Pioneer Press. Again, the same article about the purchase of the doubloon, only now on the front page. Apparently, the news was significant enough to be moved to a more prominent place in the next edition. I sipped my coffee and pondered my new life. What would I do with the $5 million? Part of it would go to provide for a comfortable old age, of course. Perhaps I'll buy a small house instead of a rented apartment. I'd like to have a garden. Small so it won't be too much work, but enough for a few rose bushes that Elizabeth loves so much. The rest? Maybe travel? I've always wanted to see Europe, walk the streets of Rome, visit the Louvre in Paris, wander the hills of Scotland, or Asia, Japan with its ancient temples and rock gardens, Thailand with its beaches. My musings were interrupted by the sound of the phone at a neighboring table. A young man pulled out his cell phone and answered it. His conversation was loud enough for me to hear. Yes, Mark. Yes, reading the morning paper. Unbelievable, isn't it? $5 million for some old coin. Somebody really made a fortune. I smiled into my cup. If only he knew that some old coin was a piece of history that had survived the ages, that it was held by people who lived long before this city was founded, before this country existed. After finishing my coffee, I paid and went on my way. I wanted to go to a bookstore to buy travel guides to the countries I was planning to visit. Coming home with a bag of books, I noticed a familiar car parked not far from my house. Rupert's silver Lexus. He was sitting behind the wheel, obviously waiting for me. I could have turned around and walked away. But why? This conversation was bound to happen sooner or later. Rupert spotted me as I approached the driveway. He jumped out of the car, ran towards me. He didn't look too good, wrinkled, unshaven, eyes red from sleep. "Dad!" he exclaimed, stopping in front of me. "At last! I've been going crazy trying to find you." "Hello, Rupert," I answered calmly. "As you can see, I'm all right." "You're all right?" he almost shouted. "You disappeared without a trace. I've called every hospital, every morgue. Justina filed a missing persons report. And you say everything's fine?" "I left a note," I reminded him. "I said I'd decided to live on my own. On a piece of paper in a cafe." He flapped his arms. "That's not what normal people do. Normal people give advance notice, discuss their plans, and don't run away like unwanted old people who are going to be put in a nursing home?" I finished for him. Rupert paused. His face took on a strange expression, a mixture of guilt and annoyance. "We meant well," he said more quietly. "Westbrook Gardens is a great place. It's got professional care, socializing, entertainment." "Spare me the advertising slogans," I interrupted. "We both know it wasn't for me, it was for you and Justina. To free up the house, to get rid of the burden." He didn't deny it. He just stood there with his head down, like a misbehaving schoolboy. "Come," I said after a pause. "We'll talk at my place. It's not like we're going to find out in the street." We went up to the apartment. Rupert looked around, clearly surprised that the place was decent enough. "Not bad," he said. "How long have you been here?" "Almost a week," I said, putting the kettle on. "And you're going to live here? On what means? Your pension is barely enough to pay the rent." I smiled. "Don't worry about my finances. I'm quite well off." Rupert frowned, not understanding. Then his gaze fell on the newspaper on the table. The headline about the sale of a doubloon was clearly visible. "What's this?" He reached for the paper. I did not interfere. He took the paper, read the article. His face slowly changed as he realized what had happened. Was that, was that you?" he asked, shocked. "You sold the coin for 5 million?" I nodded. "But where did you get it from?" "I've never seen," he stammered, trying to collect his thoughts. "A colonial-era gold doubloon," I confirmed. "A family heirloom, passed down from father to son for 5 generations. I got it from my father when I turned 30. And you never told me about it." The resentment in his voice was mixed with greed. "I was waiting for the right time, waiting for you to be mature enough to appreciate not only its monetary value, but its historical value." I shrugged. That moment never came. Rupert slumped back in his chair, still clutching the paper in his hands. 5 million, he whispered. "All this time you had a coin worth $5 million. It wasn't always worth that much," I pointed out. "When I got it, it was valued at a few thousand. But such rare specimens only get more expensive as the years go by." The kettle boiled, and I began to make tea. Rupert sat silent, digesting the information. "What now?" he asked at last. "You're just going to walk out of our lives? Out of my life?" There was genuine pain in his voice, and for a moment I felt a prick of conscience. After all, he is my son, my flesh and blood. But then I remembered all those years of neglect, all those conversations behind my back. "I'm not leaving your life, Rupert," I said softly. "I'm just starting my own, the one I've been putting off for too long." "What about home? Our family home?" "The house is yours," I said. "I'm giving up my share in favor of you. A lawyer will draw up the necessary documents." He paused for a moment, thinking about what I had said. Then he asked cautiously, "And the money? 5 million? That's a fortune. Here it is, the question I had been waiting for." "The money is mine," I answered firmly. "The coin belonged to me, and I disposed of it as I saw fit." "But it is a family heirloom," he objected. "You said yourself that it had been handed down from generation to generation." "And I should have passed it on to you," I agreed, "when you were ready." "But you weren't ready, Rupert. You never took an interest in my collection, never asked about the family history. It was just old junk to you, as Justina put it." He blushed but didn't deny it. "You could have just told me about the coin," he muttered. "I could have," I agreed. "But then what? Would you have convinced me to sell it and split the money? Or maybe you just take it away, like you wanted to take my house." "We didn't take your house," he was outraged. "We offered you a better life." "In a nursing home," I nodded. "On me. And you could use my room for your needs." Rupert had no answer. We sat in silence, drinking tea. Finally he asked, "What now? What are your plans?" "First, I'll get the money from the museum," I said. "It will take a couple more weeks. I have to finalize all the formalities. Then maybe I'll buy a small house. I want to have a garden again, and I'll travel. There are lots of places I've always wanted to see." Rupert listened, nodding. Then he asked bluntly, "And us? I mean, our relationship. Is there any chance of fixing it?" I looked at my son. Despite everything that had happened, he was still a part of me. But it wouldn't be the same, and it was better to say it straight. "We can start over," I replied, like two adults who respected each other's boundaries. "But we can't go back to the way things were, Rupert. Too much has happened." He nodded, accepting my terms. We talked for another hour or so about the past, about the future, about how our lives had changed. When he was about to leave, he stopped at the door and turned to me. "You know I really loved you, Dad," he said quietly. "It's just, life is complicated." "I know, son," I said. "I know." After he left, I stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the city. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. There was a new life ahead of me, new opportunities, and I was ready for this new journey. 6 months flew by like a day. The money from the sale of the doubloon came into my account at the beginning of December, and I immediately began to realize my plans. The first thing I did was to buy a small house in Highland Park, a quiet, green neighborhood in St. Paul. Nothing fancy. 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, a spacious living room with a fireplace, and most importantly, a cozy garden where you could plant roses, which Elizabeth loved so much. The move took place just before Christmas. I remember standing in the empty living room, surrounded by boxes and feeling a strange mixture of elation and melancholy. This was my home, only mine. No one could tell me where and how to live, what to do, how to dispose of my belongings. Rupert and I communicated rarely and formally. After we'd met at the apartment, he'd called several times, offering to help me move, inviting me to dinner. I politely declined. It wasn't that I didn't want to see him. I just needed time to build new boundaries, new relationships. No longer as father and son, dependent on each other, but as two adults respecting each other's autonomy. At Christmas, he sent a card with a short text. "Merry Christmas, Dad. I hope we can see each other more often in the new year. Rupert and Justina." I sent back an equally discreet card, but without the invitation to visit. In January, I flew to Hawaii, my first real trip in years. 2 weeks on the island of Maui, in a small oceanfront bungalow. Warm sand under my feet, the sound of the surf, colorful sunsets. All the things Elizabeth and I had once dreamed of, but never realized due to a constant lack of time and money. Every morning I would wake up at sunrise, go out on the terrace with a cup of coffee, and just look at the ocean. At those moments, I could almost physically feel Elizabeth's presence beside me. It was as if she too was enjoying this view, this moment of peace and beauty. When I returned to St. Paul, I dove headfirst into the garden. I hired a landscape designer, but I did most of the work myself. Digging, planting, watering. It was therapeutic. To work with my hands, to create beauty, to see how day by day the space around the house transforms. By the end of March, the garden began to take shape. The central place was occupied by a bed of roses, 10 bushes of different varieties which were to bloom in June. Around, small ornamental trees and shrubs, creating secluded corners for recreation. In the far corner, I installed a fountain, near which I placed a comfortable bench, a perfect place to read on warm summer days. In April, I went traveling again, this time to Europe, London, Paris, Rome, Florence, Vienna. It was like I was making up for all those years of being tied to work, to home, to commitments. In each city, I visited numismatic museums and stores, got acquainted with collectors, sometimes bought interesting specimens for my collection. It was no longer so valuable without the gold doubloon, but it was still an important part of my life. When I returned from Europe in May, I decided to do some charity work. The money from the sale of the doubloon was wisely invested, brought in a steady income, and my needs were modest. So why not share with those in real need? I chose a few local organizations, a homeless animal shelter, a veterans outreach center, and a small library in a disadvantaged area of town. I didn't seek public recognition. I just did what I thought was right. I was especially excited about working with the library. We organized a reading program for children from low-income families. Seeing a child's eyes light up as they discover the world of books for the first time is priceless. One day in early June, I was coming back from the library after another reading session. It was a hot day, so I decided to stop at an ice cream parlor on Grand Avenue. I was sitting at a table on the open veranda, enjoying a vanilla ice cream cone with hot chocolate sauce, when I heard a familiar voice. "Dad?" I looked up. Rupert was standing in front of me, holding Justina's hand. They were clearly as surprised as I was. "Rupert, Justina," I nodded. "What an unexpected meeting." "We were just passing through," Rupert said. "We thought we'd stop for ice cream. Can I sit with you?" I gestured them to a table. They ordered ice cream, and we sat in awkward silence for a while. "You look good, Dad," Rupert said at last. "Traveling is obviously good for you." "Thank you," I said. "Yes, I just got back from Europe." "Europe?" Justina asked with ill-concealed envy. "How wonderful. And we're still working and working." "How's the house?" Rupert asked, clearly trying to change the subject. "I hear you bought something in Highland Park?" "Yes, a little Victorian mansion," I said. "It's nothing fancy, but I like it. Especially the garden. Planted the roses your mother loves so much." Rupert felt a little embarrassed at the mention of Elizabeth. He had rarely spoken of her in recent years, as if he was trying to forget she existed. "It would be nice to visit sometime," he said cautiously. to see how you're settling in." I didn't answer right away. Did I want to see him in my house? The new house that symbolized my freedom, my independence? "Maybe someday," I said at last. While I was still settling in, Justina shivered, clearly uncomfortable. She barely participated in the conversation, only occasionally glancing appraisingly at my clothes, at the watch on my wrist. Figuring out how much these things cost, trying to estimate how rich I'd gotten. "I hear you do charity work?" Rupert asked, finishing his ice cream. I wondered, "How do you know?" "St. Paul's a small town, Dad," he shrugged. "People talk, especially when it comes to big donations." "I just help those I can help," I answered discreetly. "It's nothing special." "It's very noble," Justina said with a strained smile. There was silence. I could see where this was going. They were trying to feel the ground, to find out how open I was to contact, and more importantly, how open my wallet was. "You know, Dad," Rupert began, choosing his words carefully. "Justina and I are going through a difficult time. The firm is downsizing, and my position is in jeopardy. And the roof on the house needs repair, and the car's acting up. That's it. The real reason for their sudden friendliness." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said flatly. "I hope you'll be able to cope." Rupert looked disappointed. He had obviously expected me to offer financial assistance. "Yes, of course we will," he said with a strained smile. "I just thought that, well, since you're doing so well, maybe we could discuss some kind of arrangement. We are family after all." "Family," I repeated thoughtfully. "It's interesting that you only remembered that now, when you found out about the money." Rupert blushed. "That's not fair, Dad. I always thought of us as a family. It's just that we sometimes made mistakes in judgment." "Mistaken judgments," I nodded. "A good euphemism for kicking your own father out of the house." "We didn't kick you out," Justina intervened. "Westbrook Gardens is a beautiful place, with professional care and—" I held up my hand to stop her. "Let's not go back to that. What's done is done." Finishing my coffee, I stood up. "It was nice seeing you, but I have to go. I have a meeting with the landscaper." "Wait, Dad," Rupert got up too. "We still haven't had a chance to talk about the help." I looked at my son for a long moment. In that moment, I felt neither anger nor resentment, but only fatigue and frustration. "Rupert, I've helped you all your life," I said quietly. "I've paid for your education, your hobbies, your mistakes. Denied myself everything so that you could have the best. And how did you repay me? You decided to get rid of me when I became an inconvenience." "That's not true," he started, but I interrupted. "You're 39 years old. You have a good education, your own house, your own health. If you can't support yourself now, when can you? At 50? At 60? He was silent, his eyes downcast. Justina looked at me with ill-concealed dislike. "I won't give you the money," I said firmly, but without anger. "Not because I can't or won't help my son. It's because it won't help. You need to learn to live within your means, to take responsibility for your decisions." "Come on, Rupert," Justina said abruptly, getting up from the table. "Your father is obviously too busy with his new life to worry about his family." Rupert hesitated, looking at me and at his wife. Finally, he sighed and followed her. "Goodbye, Dad," he said without turning around. I watched them go, feeling strangely relieved. It was as if the last thread tying me to the past had finally been severed. I was free, really free. That evening, I sat on the veranda of my new home, enjoying the warm summer evening. The roses, planted in the spring, were beginning to bloom, filling the air with a delicate fragrance. On the table in front of me was a catalog for an upcoming Sotheby's auction. On the cover was a rare Tudor silver coin, just like the one in my collection. I had purchased it years ago from an old collector who didn't realize its true value. I paid only $500, though even then it was worth 10 times that. Now, according to the catalog, its starting price at auction was $300,000. Not as impressive an amount as the gold doubloon, but still substantial. Enough to fulfill another dream, the cruise around the world that Elizabeth and I had often talked about when we were young. I looked up from the photograph of my wife on the table. It was taken on our silver wedding day, smiling with a bouquet of roses in her hands, as beautiful as the day we first met. "See, darling," I said quietly, as if she might hear. It's all worked out. I'm finally living the life we dreamed of. I only wish you were here." A light breeze blew through the garden, ruffling the rose petals. For a moment I thought it was Elizabeth answering me, telling me that she was always there. I smiled and looked at the catalog again. Tomorrow I will contact the auction house and offer them my coin, and in a month I'll be traveling around the world. Alone, but with the memory of her in my heart. Life went on, the new life I had chosen for myself, and for the first time in years I was truly happy.